The Los Angeles Dodgers are likely going to need starting pitching this offseason. So, should the White Sox do business with them again and a potential deal for Garrett Crochet? Let's discuss next on Lockdown White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and the site expert of SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fansided Network, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode, subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already, and also follow or subscribe to the show at wherever you get your podcasts. Well, regardless of if the Dodgers advance to the NLCS, their starting pitching is in rough shape, and it could mean they will be motivated to get an ace in the offseason, like Garrett Crochet. Let's discuss if the Sox should do business with that organization after getting ripped off at the deadline. Then, New York Post baseball insider John Heyman has added 3 more names to the Sox manager search that I want to go over. And finally, let's wrap up the show with the Chicago Sports Network getting off to a rough start, and I may have overestimated the over-the-air components. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Download the app today and use code LOCKDOWNMLB to win $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. All right, so I actually don't want the Sox to do business with the Dodgers when it comes to possibly trading Garrett Crochet. Again, I am in the camp of extend Garrett Crochet. Let's keep him through the rest of the decade. Let's have him anchor a potential starting rotation of Noah Schultz, Hagen Smith, Jonathan Cannon, and maybe Drew Thorpe or Davis Martin, or again, Sean Burke, Kai Bush. I mean, you've got a lot of options. But at the same time, the Sox have a lot of options that is probably going to motivate them to say, you know what, we're not paying you, Garrett, and we're going to trade you instead. And plus, he is the only valuable trade piece that the Sox now have in the trade market for a lineup that desperately needs an impact bat. I started the week off talking about the Sox need a superstar, and they just don't have one. So they might have to leverage Garrett Crochet's market to potentially get one. And I will dive deeper, but, in terms of why I have my reasons, but here are my reasons. First, Dodgers president of baseball operations, Andrew Freeman, he already took Chris Getz to school once. I think he's going to take him to school again and Getz cannot miss on this if he's going to trade Garrett Crochet. He cannot walk away from any potential trade return where a talent such as Miguel Vargas is the headliner. 2, I don't see the Dodgers being desperate enough to throw in the prospects the Sox wanted for Crochet at the deadline. I just don't think they're going to have that desperation. Another stud pitcher, first of all, could end up on the trade market that the Dodgers could pivot to, and they're going to get Ohtani back in the rotation, and they have gobs of money to spend in free agency. 3, the Dodgers don't seem to have a problem ever trading their top pitching prospect away, at least the ones that they don't have a spot for. But the only trade they're hitting away, unless there's literally no room at all, Michael Busch. Or as it turns out, the player's just not an effective big league level player like Miguel Vargas. And 4, I would rather exploit the Orioles' desperation for starting pitching. And I get it's sort of turning up my nose in an organization with the fifth best farm system according to MLB, and especially since the Sox just lost a record 121 losses, you should be looking for the best deal possible from any team. And I did harp on, why did the Sox not trade Erick Fedde to the Twins if that was the better deal? And it was, well, you just can't trade pitcher to your division rival. You don't want to help your division rival. Well, if you would have traded Erick Fedde to the Minnesota Twins, hindsight being 2020, the Twins didn't make the playoffs. You would have definitely ripped them off. But you and I have already seen, and I just gave an example of Getz missing that moment with the Erick Fedde and Michael Kopech deal. If he's going to trade Crochet, he cannot miss that moment. And I'll discuss that in a few seconds, but he can't miss it. He's got to hit on this type of deal because the public relations blowback, the clubhouse blowback is going to be immense if you trade your best player. And I shared on the show and on SouthsideShowdown.com how Getz just got panned by his own peers for not getting a better return at the trade deadline, especially for Eric Fetty, Michael Kopech, and Tommy Pham. And then also he just got panned by not moving Crochet because technically, even though he demanded an extension, teams were still willing to offer the White Sox competitive packages. They weren't trying to exploit him, according to reports. Although, again, let's look at from their perspective. They were probably like, hey, we gave him the best deal possible. And I'm sure Chris Getz was like, okay, I can't walk away from that. So I'll give him credit for not moving Crochet for the sake of moving Crochet, Jason Stark of The Athletic, though, he wrote this back in August that perfectly sums up Getz missing the moment. It was a seller's market, and the industry consensus is that by the standard, the White Sox weren't able to use the market to build up the sort of prospect inventory the other big league sellers collected. In part, that was because of the way they handled that 3-team trade. But the biggest part was their decision not to trade Crochet when he was clearly the most heavily pursued pitcher and player overall in this market. But clearly you're thinking, wait, didn't Crochet's agent say he wouldn't work in relief for a new team or pitch in October unless he got a contract extension? And yep, that happened. But several execs I spoke with this week said their teams were willing to ignore that edict. And if the White Sox general manager Chris Getz thought that was a deal breaker, why did he keep talking to multiple teams about Crochet practically right until the deadline gong sounded? So, as one NL exec put it, quote, I just don't feel like they maximized what they could have gotten. And when you're going through a rebuild and you have a really good trade assets, you have to maximize them if you're going to get through it quickly, end quote. And that's another thing. If you're going to make this deal with any team, it should be with the intention of not only getting a core foundational player in your lineup, 2 core foundational players in your lineup, but that it's going to maybe get you being back to competitive, say, at 2027, because right now I can't give you a timeline. Yes, the pitching is going to be great. I think the pitching could, if the Sox maximize and these arms don't get hurt and all of them actually pan out, you could put together a bullpen, you could put together a starting rotation. The problem is where the run's going to come from. Because right now I just don't see it. And you do need to score runs. Otherwise, you're going to lose a lot of 3-2 games, a lot of 2-1 games, a lot of 1-0 games. That's the reality. Stark later wrote about how 2 veteran front office guys, obviously schooled Getz in the Fetty deal. So how'd that happen? The White Sox had to agree to it. And John Mozelinek and the Cardinals front office did an excellent job of driving it in their own direction. But Friedman, the Dodgers president of baseball operations, just has his way of spinning that sort of 3-team magic. And as his fellow execs can't help but applaud it. Quote, Andrew always knows how to find a way to extract the talent that he's looking for, even if the match isn't quite there with the team he's trying to extract the talent from, end quote. And that was one NL exec. That's the thing you're up against. You're up against a very shrewd, very experienced president of baseball operations. He's going to get what he wants, and that would be Garrett Crochet, and he's going to get it at the lowest possible price that he can get it from. And he just proved it. And out of that, I get that Moneyball feeling. If you actually do read the book Moneyball, or if you saw that, Billy Beane was the master at turning deals into 3-team trades, getting general managers to be like, well, I got this deal already set up with the other team. And he'd be like, well, let me get on the phone. I'll make it even better and we'll make it a 3-team deal. And then he would just fleece them. But, I got that feeling where Friedman got on the phone with Cards GM, John Mozelinek, and they're like, let's take this rookie to school and leave him with the scraps. And that's basically what happened. The Sox got left with scraps in that Eric Fetty and Michael Kopech deal. Got Miguel Vargas, and he may have been a one-time top prospect or one of their top prospects for the Dodgers, but he'd been given enough runway with the Dodgers to show his career was pointed toward basically being a utility player at best. He just can't hit velocity, and that should have been caught by the Sox scouts. That should have been caught. Maybe if you had data and analytics, better data and analytics. But if the front office still wanted him, okay, but get more than 2 scratch-off prospects to mitigate it, especially one that had a broken leg as a backup in the deal. I fear the same thing will happen again, as it's documented that the Dodgers wanted Crochet at the deadline, but it was at their price, not the Sox. And the Sox cannot make another deal like that. They have to make it a deal at their price, like what they got with Dylan Cease, for example. But they got to get some bats. They can't get, just Samuel Zavala. And because, again, he's their last valuable trade asset they have. The F4 proves it. Garrett Crochet finished with a 4.7 F4. The next closest player, Chris Flexen at 1.3. Luis Robert Jr. has to be resurrected for him to ever even get back to that level. So right now, Crochet is the last valuable asset the Sox have, and they cannot miss the boat if they move him. The Dodgers may get bounced from the playoffs again for the same problem, starting pitching issues. The injuries, the ineffectiveness has been so bad that they were bullpenning in Game 4 in an elimination game, and they still have TBD for Game 5. But I doubt that sends them into a panic to finally say, you know what? Here's our top prospect, mashing catcher / outfielder Dalton Rushing. Because that's what it was reported. The Sox wanted Rushing, and I want the Sox to demand Rushing then. But the Dodgers kept countering with pitching prospect River Ryan, who just had Tommy John surgery. And it was known he had shoulder issues and then an elbow issue. But think about it. The Dodgers just kept pushing River Ryan on him. And the Dodgers are going to have options. With the refusal to already part with Rushing once, I'm sure that, that stance is not going to change because they have options. They could go into free agency and just go sign Corbin Burns. And it would be nice to get Rushing, and it would be nice to get Andy Paganis, and even one of their top 4 shortstops they have in their top 10. They have 4 shortstops in their top 10. But honestly, if I'm the Dodgers, I'd be like, you know what? I'll just go sign Blake Snell if that's going to be the cost. It's just going to cost me money. Or I could see Freeman Jedi mind tricking Getz into taking on Bobby Miller, Nick Frasso, and Ryan. Pitchers. You don't need pitchers. You need hitters. And the Dodgers never seem to want to trade those impact hitters away again unless they have legit no spot for them. None. That's why they had to move Michael Busch. And again, I would prefer to see the Sox exploit the Orioles' desperation if they want to pursue another ace in the trade market. The dream is Kobe Mayo or Samuel Basallo, 2 top 15 prospects, 2 potential stud bats. That's a dream. But even if it's Enrique Bradford Jr. or Dylan Beavers, I'd be comfortable. As the Orioles have shown, when they trade their excess away, they can still trade away productive major league pieces. The Brewers got Joey Ortiz, who was the number 63 prospect in baseball at the time. They got DL Hall, who could be a versatile pitching piece, and a competitive balanced first-round pick for 1 year of Corbin Burns. That's what they got. Now, you'd hope Getz can leverage something a bit more for 2 years of control of Crochet, but for 1 year of a Cy Young winner, and also I mentioned the Brewers drink, you can get a young piece to add to your lineup, a pitching option for your rotation or bullpen, and you can actually select your other prospect among the top 100 pool of draft prospects, aka more spins at the draft wheel. Now, obviously, I would want 4 or 5 players for Crochet, but even if 3 and a first rounder, if the Orioles do get another competitive balance one, because those are the ones that can be traded, not a bad return. And precedents that their desperation for starting pitching can be paid off, whereas the Dodgers, they always explore all their options. They always do. And you can point to, hey, the Sox got Nick Nastrini and Jordan Leisure, and I get it. They got him at the previous deadline, but Nastrini's got to figure out his command. Leisure's got to refine what he did so well in spring training. And finally, if Getz is going to trade Crochet, he's got to hit because, again, I keep saying it's his last valuable trade piece. It's the last one. So you got to yield at least in 2 guys that I believe can be 99% cornerstone bats. And I'm not sure Getz is capable of pulling that off. And I'm not even sure Getz is in charge because I want to discuss the White Sox manager search now because 3 more names have been linked to the White Sox manager opening. 2 of them have ties to the Shadow GM. Let's discuss who they are next on Locked On White Sox. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, with the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash, receive unlimited 1% deposit bonuses, and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at Robinhoodgold.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. And welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox is available on all major podcast platforms, so make sure to follow or subscribe. Because again, we're available on places such as Apple and Spotify. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me, because I know if you're still in your heart of hearts a White Sox fan, you need a good vent. You need a good, I try to have a discussion, even though it's one-sided. That's why I'm here for you. Give you a good vent. 3 more names are on the list of potential targets for the Sox manager search, according to New York Post and Odyssey baseball insider Jon Heyman. One actually has a vision of going big. One of the names, it sounds like, hey, the Sox are willing to go big on this, but it's not going to happen. The other two is shades of shadow GM Tony La Russa making the hire because they have ties to him. And when you hear one of those names, it'll make you think, okay, in this instance, I don't want Tony involved at all. As everydayers know, and I've discussed a few times on the show, I only want Tony La Russa involved on closing Skip Schumacher if that is the guy the process spits out. If the process spits out that, yep, Skip is still our top target, we want him, I want Tony involved because, again, there is that tie. Tony was Skip's first manager, and Skip has says he still holds Tony in high regard. But I don't want Tony pushing former Angels manager Phil Nevin. That's right. Phil Nevin is one of the names Heyman listed along with Cardinals bench coach Daniel Descalso. And I'll get to how Daniel Descalso ties to Tony in a second. But the other target he lists that I think is bold, I think it's energetic, and I think it actually removes the shadow GM Tony La Russa, is Rangers bench coach Will Venable. That's a third candidate that Heyman reports that is kind of the dream target for the Sox, but it's not going to happen. It's the type of swing you still want to see the Sox take, even though it's not going to happen. And the reason it's not going to happen is what Heyman alluded to, is that Venables is the heir apparent in Texas. Once Bruce Bochy is ready to step down, it's Venables' job. And it's kind of the same thing that happened in Houston. Everybody wanted the Houston man, the guy that I just forgot his name off the top of my head, but who replaced Dusty Baker. I remember that was the hot name. He stayed in Houston because he knew he was going to get the Houston job. Why leave? And again, why would Venables leave the organization that is willing to leave an organization that is willing to move heaven and earth to win for the dysfunctional White Sox? And it ain't going to be about money since the Sox don't pay managers. And it is not going to be about power since Shadow GM Tony is there with the ear of the owner and an owner who gets in the way of doing things done properly and modernly. So that leaves Nevin and Descalso to discuss. So let's start with Nevin. Managed the Angels for 2 seasons in the dying days of Shohei Ohtani and Mike Trout being together. Took over for Joe Maddon after Maddon was fired on June 8th, 2022. And first, if you're going with Joe, if you're thinking, hey, Joe Maddon, no. We're not going there. Don't get me wrong. Love Joe's quirkiness. Love how he manages a clubhouse. But I don't love how someone has become I don't love how he's become someone yelling at the clouds. And also, he would likely be a non-starter because the actual GM who we think is in charge gets is at least, saying, I would like a partner in my manager, a guy that's going to help me out running the club, getting that winning going, developing the talent. And Maddon has always butted heads with the front office. All right, anyways, back to Nevin. Went 119 and 149 in basically a season and a half as the Angels manager. The only thing I like about him is he's a former big league player. That's one of my criteria. And he has some experience, obviously, in the big seat. And also dealing with bad ownership experience helps. So those are the 3 things. But after I read so I reached out to the guys at Locked On Angels, and they emailed me their thoughts on Nevin, and this is why I get turned off about it. So this is from co-host Mike Frisch. This is what he wrote. Phil was never the guy in Anaheim. He was a holdover that held the team together after Maddon was fired and retained for 2023 for a run at the playoffs. Due to this, the Halos GM and Nevin didn't really have a plan or a strategy, which made things difficult in 2023 and hard to evaluate. Overall, Nevin is a hard-nosed manager with an old school kind of philosophy. His way of teaching is soft, and then angry. That's part of the reason the Halos went to Ron Washington. We needed a teacher who would develop our young core. Not sure that's Nevin. He seems to be a better fit for a ready-to-win now teams. Then John Fritsch added this. I agree with everything Mike had to say as well. And I add that I don't think Nevin would have been the manager of the Angels had Artie Moreno not put the Angels on the market and then took them off. That really messed up any kind of plan they may have had. We believe the thinking was, well, If a new owner wants to come in and make changes, it wouldn't make sense for us to hire a manager for the next 3 to 5 years. And that's how we view Nevin getting the job. In addition, I really think that Nevin lost control of the circus that was the Halos last year, Rendon being injured and avoiding the media, Shohei media attention, Mike Trout being hurt, etc. The vibe seemed pretty bad in the locker room with everything that the White Sox are going through right now. I'm not sure Nevin is the guy to handle a situation like that. So yes, red alarm. Can't develop young players. Let's see. That's what the Sox want someone to do. They're going to give the runway now. Clubhouse dysfunction, something that Chris Getz wants to get rid of. But here's why I'm turned off even more so about Nevin, and it's his ties to Tony La Russa. Yes, they crossed paths when Nevin was a minor league manager for the Diamondbacks when Tony was running the Diamondbacks. And Tony even nearly hired him to be the Diamondbacks manager in 2014. This is a quote from azcentral.com. Back in 2015, this is what La Russa said, quote, "He's highly rated. He did a heck of an interview. He got serious consideration for this job. He would do an outstanding job. I think Phil would be on the list of guys," end quote. And I think the list of the Sox manager job is being made up by Tony, as you got Skip Schumacher on the top. And I'm fine with that because he has the NL Manager of the Year award and a playoff appearance. And Kim Nang, a woman you and I would want to have actually in charge of the Sox, thought he was worth hiring in Miami. So he has a third-party seal of approval. Nevin and Descalso, and I'll touch on Descalso's tie shortly to Tony, is showing that Tony's making the hire. And I don't want that anymore. Reason being, if Getz is supposed to be in charge, then let him be in charge. And get rid of this shadow GM. Get rid of this guy behind the scenes. And if Tony's supposedly there to be a sounding board, and right away, Tony should not even be a sounding board. He shouldn't even be in the organization. Nothing good has happened since his return. And don't give me that 2021 AL Central BS, because that happened in spite of him. And he got absolutely outmanaged when wins above replacement managers matter by Dusty Baker. He got schooled. And if you want to, and that's the other thing. So I know I'm going to get this quote. I know I'm going to get a comment or an email. If you want to be a Tony apologist, first, I implore you, and I've met the man. I legit believe him when he says he doesn't care what people think of him. He has that aura. Okay? So you don't need to defend him because he doesn't care. He doesn't care what I say about him. Also, open your eyes and see the game passed him by, and he's clinging to something that can really never be brought back because pitching velocity and pitching construction are making it harder and harder to hit. And also, he seems to be the only one in the world that thinks not hitting home runs in guaranteed rate field is a good idea. Okay? Back to the search. You bring in Skip, at least you have washed away the stink of Tony having direct influence, because I think Skip has enough sense to know he doesn't owe Tony a thing. He'd be almost doing Tony a favor coming here. You hire Phil. He has a debt to Tony. It's not like Phil Nevin's going to be getting another job anytime soon. And again, I may pan Getz. I panned him in the first segment. But if he's supposed to be in charge of baseball operations, let him be in charge. Enough with this dysfunction and the shadowness of who is running things. The shadow GM. And how does Daniel Descalso tie into Tony? Well, guess where Daniel got his big league start? The Cardinals. That's where he started his playing career in 2010 when Tony was the manager here. That's right. Descalso was on the 2011 World Series team. In terms of what he brings to the table, I reached out to JD Haffron, host of Locked On White Cardinals, and he told me, well, he's a bench coach, so not much to say. Thinks he has a great relationship with coaching staff and players, but he couldn't tell me if he knows anything about managing an entire team. Does check the former big league manager box for me, but the ties to Tony without the accolades that Skip has, nor the validation from an outside source like Kim Ang, just doesn't sit right with me. All right, so I have to admit I was wrong on one thing when it came to the Sox new television broadcast station, the Chicago Sports Network, and let's discuss that along with the rough launch it is off to next on Locked On White Sox. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. PrizePicks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in over 30 states, including Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, Iowa, and Indiana. PrizePicks puts its members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. So when your picks hit, you can get your money in as quick as 15 minutes. So let's see. Fun and simple concept. Can play basically anywhere in the Midwest and can get your money quickly. Sign me up. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, PrizePicks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. And welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all my everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. And please make sure to hit the like button on the today's episode if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening via podcast, hey, 5-star review would be great. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox or wherever they get their podcasts, as this show is available on all major platforms. Okay, so leave it to an entity backed in part by Sox owner Jerry Reinsdorf to look just terrible. Make it even worse, it's the first impression. The Chicago Sports Network is the new sports channel that launched on October 1st. That's going to carry the Chicago White Sox games next season, along with this season Chicago Bulls and Chicago Blackhawks games. And remember, if you're been Rip Van Winkle and sleeping for years and years and years, remember Jerry owns the Bulls, and for some reason the Blackhawks, the same tenant as the United Center, have a blood oath to Jerry. But it's a hot mess right now. The content is fine, in my opinion. I mean, they hired some great talent for their shows. They're going to use Stadium 2 to program throughout the day. The content's great. Pretty much everyone from the Blackhawks broadcast is returning, and they even got a better play-by-play voice. Sounds like Chuck Garfien and Ozzie Guillen will return next season to do pre and post. Steve Stone is signed long-term to do in-game analysis. You and I have to deal with John Triffin, but take him out of the equation. And the Sox do a great TV broadcast that isn't changing. And the Bulls do a great TV broadcast. The actual broadcast product has never been a problem for those 3 teams. Well, now that Chris Foster's is gone, and John Triffin, but otherwise, it's been a great product. But the station's available over the air. And I talked about on the show a few episodes back on how that could be a driver in any owner buying the team once Jerry passes and wanting to stay in Chicago, because we still have that little dark cloud, folks, that the White Sox could, possibly move to Nashville. But it turns out I was wrong on that, and not on the Sox staying in Chicago. They're here as long as Jerry Reinsdorf is breathing, and who knows what the next owner will do. I can't predict that. But nope, I was wrong on, Chicago Sports Network saying like, hey, by going over the air, we can right away immediately reach 600,000 households, because there are about 600,000 households in Chicago without a streaming or cable service, according to their research. I thought, hey, that's great. But I think I misdiagnosed the public's appetite for over the air. Also being available on streaming, also not being available on streaming services and cable is a hot mess right now, because they're only available on DirecTV and DirecTV Stream and AT&T Universe and Sound, which I never heard of. That's all they're available on right now. Although I believe for us Sox TV consumers, we possibly don't have to worry about any of that so long as we pony up for an MLB TV, which I'll just discuss in a second. But still, they're facing a huge, huge problem, because the problem with the antenna option that I'm getting the vibes on from social media is no one really wants to do it. No one wants to deal with an antenna. And can you blame them? Our forefathers decided they were tired of trying to get the best signal or a hazy signal. They're tired of messing around. I know my father was. So he said, the heck with it. I'll pay for cable. Now, there might be a revolution on cable and satellite services right now, but it's a cost revolution, not the technology. And as Lawrence Holmes pointed out on 670 The Score, and I'll admit too, I listened to his podcast and I was like, yeah, that's a neat nugget that the Sox can alone already reach 600K households with the Rabbit Ears. That's cool that the Blackhawks are now going to claim Milwaukee and Indianapolis as their home markets. It's two other markets that don't have hockey. This is great. But as he even pointed out, CHSN did a terrible job of trying to convince folks Rabbit Ears isn't expensive nor hard to set up. They didn't do a very good job. They especially dropped the ball on Gen Z, who's never had to deal with this technology. This is basically like asking Gen Z to trade in their iPhone for a flip phone. And yes, I'm an older millennial. Millennial. So I did deal with the, antenna issues. But the second problem the station is facing is they still have no deal with Comcast to get carried on Xfinity, the largest provider in the Chicago market. I believe the number is 50% of the television audience has Xfinity. Kind of a big deal, and not great, Bob. And they basically, CHSN has a deadline until right before the puck drops on tonight's Blackhawks game to avoid more wrath. Because they're just getting hammered. And again, it's CHSN, not CHGO. Stop blaming CHGO Blackhawks or CHGO Bulls. Okay? And speaking of CHGO, the issue sounds like, according to CHGO Chicago Blackhawks podcast host and reporter Jay Zawaski, is Comcast is fine with carrying the channel. They just want it on their highest tier package. And team owners don't want that because they want the carriage fees not limited. That's the driver, the carriage fees. And they don't want it limited. That's always been the issue lately. Providers are waking up and realizing regional sports networks or RSNs, they're specialized channels. And they're not only specialized channels, they're charging high carriage fees to cover high rights fees. And the providers are finally like, I don't want to pass that cost on to the majority of my audience, because that majority of their audience doesn't want the channel to begin with. They're not watching it. And owners fearing revenue sources are drying up have not adapted well at all. Because again, if the Hawks, Bulls, and Sox wanted to be on Xfinity today, right now, they can do that. So Zawaski is basically saying, if they wanted a deal, they can do it right now. A deal is in place, sign it, and move forward. At least on Comcast end, they have their deal. They have their terms. Sign it and move on. But money is the driver, and CHSN is trying to get on other packages on Xfinity. And it sounds like Comcast isn't budging. And remember, CHSN is a response to Comcast basically alluding that they're getting out of the RSN business. They're getting out of being the actual carrier. They've been pulling out of other markets where, the NBC Philadelphia, for example, or NBC, I think it was NBC Bay Area and NBC Washington. I think they pulled out of, for sure, DC. I think the Wizards actually had to buy it back, that type of stuff. They're pulling out. They're getting out of the business. So it's kind of ironic, because when they were in the business, that's why they were available on all these platforms and there was no issue. But now there's an issue. But again, it's not all the Sox, Blackhawks, and Bulls' fault. But again, how they do business, you can't really give the Sox, Bulls, and Blackhawks much grace. And this station, again, was created in the summer. That's when it was announced. And it's now just getting around to trying to get a deal with Comcast done. Sounds like a Reinsdorf bad project if I ever heard of one. Although, as Andrew Brandt, he's on Twitter, he's a former Packers exec, as he always says, deadlines spur deals. So, but a huge hit to CHSN is YouTube TV. A major streaming service for Gen Z is not interested at all at carrying CHSN. They don't want to carry any RSNs. So that's going to be a huge hit. Also, they still have to work out deals with Hulu and Fubo TV too. And I'll admit, I'm upset because I can't get my Blackhawks games out of market, because now they're claiming Milwaukee as a hometown market, and they still haven't set up an over-the-air channel for the Milwaukee and like Indianapolis. So it's getting blacked out on ESPN Plus, a well-priced streaming service that carries NHL out-of-market games. Why can't baseball follow in the same path, or basketball? Why don't all three team up and work with like ESPN? Because ESPN wants you to use ESPN Plus. And I get it. You're a baseball fan. And the one potential workaround, and I got to do some follow-up on this actually, because with the downfall of RSNs, MLB is having to take over more teams' broadcasts. They're taking over the Guardians and the Brewers drink. I just mentioned the Brewers, but they just announced that. But because of that, they're going to be removing local blackouts on MLB TV streaming. I don't know, though, if that's going to impact the Sox and, for example, the Cubs. It just sounds like the blackouts are being removed for games MLB is producing and distributing. But, again, one way to help give teams who are keeping their rights is to get rid of these local blackouts on streaming. Because, for example, I paid $11.99 a month for ESPN Plus. I got all the NHL games, plus a ton of college hockey, plus a ton of college football, and a ton of college basketball and extra insider articles. Now, I'm a fan, and I'm willing to pay for that. I want all that. And I think it's fair price at $11.99. I don't know what your discretionary income is, but I thought that was a fair price. Great price point. And I did pay the $30 a month to get every MLB game, which I'm fine because I need it for this gig. But I only got 29 other teams to watch and minor league games, because what stunk was I couldn't get Brewers games. I still have Dish. Long story, but they have left the RSN business years ago. But even then, when I come back to Illinois to see my folks, to see my sisters, when I'm in town and all that, or even when I go to Chicago for a day trip and soak in the beautiful city, I couldn't get Sox and Cubs games. So then I couldn't get 28 games. 28. I only got 28 teams. Get rid of these blackouts and poof. Now you might be able to tell YouTube TV and Comcast, I got my workaround. So these are my terms. If you don't want to hear from upset customers who either prefer to watch everything in one spot, because there are those people, or maybe just don't have enough discretionary income to afford MLB TV or to afford ESPN Plus, and they just want to use Xfinity for everything, and that's the only discretionary income they have, you're going to have to hear from them, because I got workarounds. I got legit workarounds. But nope. Let's just put our head in the sand and keep thinking, we just got to get those carriage fees. We got to get those carriage fees. We got to get those carriage fees. Just accept you're in a new world. That carriage fees, profits are gone. You can still get some revenue, but you got to pivot like the NBA pivoted to the national TV contract. Build the game nationally. All right, well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On MLB, where our host Sully is talking the Fall Classic, and he's got it covered every single day. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And I'll be back on Monday to discuss whether it would be nice to actually hear from Chris Getz at some point. We probably should have heard from him by now to give a post-mortem on the season. Still haven't heard of him. Still haven't heard from him. So would it be nice to actually hear from your general manager? I don't know. We'll talk about that on Monday. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion regarding if the Sox should do business with the Dodgers at a potential Garrett Crochet deal. 3 more names revealed in the Sox manager search and the CHSN launch problems. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X formerly Twitter at Todd J. Dub or at Locked On Sox, or email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. See you Monday.